No, I'm much overwhelmed. Thanks so much for coming. It is a pleasure to have a full house. So it's so great to have everyone here in the theater, live. As you can see, we've gone to great lengths to make everything safe for everybody, and I'm sure everybody thinks that they're safe. So glad to have you here in a safe environment. And also glad to have everyone that's tuning in via live stream. Glad to have you there also. So it's kind of an interesting thing that we're both live and live stream all at the same time. And it's a great day for PACA. We're very, very pleased. Yay. So without further ado, we have a great show for you tonight, Marx in Soho. It is an original piece of work by Howard Zinn. It's hysterically funny, believe it or not. Who thought communism was so funny? And so feel free to enjoy yourselves. We're pleased to do a one-man show. Ken is doing an excellent job, and we're very proud to have him on our stage. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Ken Brundage in Marx in Soho.
Thank God! An audience! Good of you to come. You weren't put off by those idiots who said Marx is dead. Well, I am, and I am not. That's dialectics for you. You may wonder how I got here. Public transportation! I did not expect to come here. I wanted to return to Soho, where I lived in London, but bureaucratic mix-up. Here I am, Soho in New York. Well, I always wanted to visit New York. Why have I come back? To clear my name. I have been reading your newspapers. They are all proclaiming that my ideas are dead. It's nothing new. These clowns have been saying this for over 100 years. But did you ever wonder why it is necessary to declare me dead again and again? Well, I have had it up to here. So, I asked for the right to come back, just for a while. But there are rules. I told you, it's a bureaucracy. It is permissible to read, even to watch, but not to travel. I protested, of course, and had some support. Socrates told them that the untraveled life is not worth living. Gandhi fasted. Mother Jones threatened to picket. Mark Twain came to my defense in his own strange way. Buddha chanted, "Oh," but the rest of them stayed quiet. My God, at this point, what do they have to lose? Yes, there too, I have a reputation as a troublemaker. But even there, protest works. Finally, they said, "All right, you can go. You can have an hour or so to speak your mind. But remember, no agitating." They do believe in freedom of speech, but within limits. They are liberals. So, spread the word. Marx is back. For a little while. But understand one thing. I am not a Marxist. I said that to Pieper once and he almost croaked. I should tell you about Pieper. We were living in London, Jenny and I and the little ones, plus 2 dogs, 3 cats, 2 birds, barely living. A little flat on Dean Street, near where they dumped the city sewer. We were in London because I had been expelled from the continent, expelled from the Rhineland. Yes, my birthplace. Oh, I had done dangerous things. I was the editor of a newspaper, Der Rheinische Zeitung. Hardly revolutionary, but I suppose the most revolutionary act one can engage in is to tell the truth. In the Rhineland, the police were arresting the poor people for gathering firewood from the estates of the rich. I wrote an editorial protesting that. So, they threatened to censor our paper. I wrote an editorial saying there was no freedom of the press in Germany. They decided to prove me right. They shut us down. It was only then that we became radical. Isn't that the way it is? Our final issue of Die Zeitung, huge headline in red ink, revolt. That annoyed the authorities. So I was ordered out of the Rhineland. So I went to Paris. Where else do exiles go? Where else can you sit all night in a cafe and lie about how revolutionary you were in the old country? Yes, if you are going to be an exile, be one in Paris. Paris was our honeymoon. Jenny found a little flat in the Latin Quarter. Heavenly months. But the word was out. From the German police to the Paris police. It seems the police develop an internationalist consciousness long before the workers. So, I was expelled from Paris too. We went to Belgium. Expelled again. So, we came to London, where refugees come from all over the world. The English are admirable in their tolerance and insufferable in their boasting about it. The doctor said the cough would go away in a few weeks. That was in 1858. But I was telling you about Pieper. In London, the political refugees from the continent marched in and out of our house. Pieper was one of them. He buzzed around me like a hornet. He was a flatterer, a sycophant. He would station himself 6 inches from me so I could not avoid him. And he would quote from my writings. I would say, Pieper, please do not quote me to myself. He had the audacity to say, thinking I would be pleased, that he would translate Das Kapital into English. Ha! The man could not speak an English sentence without butchering it. Shakespeare, English is a beautiful language. It is Shakespeare's language. Oh, if Shakespeare had heard Pieper speak 1 sentence of English, he would have taken poison. But Jenny felt sorry for him and liked to invite him to our family dinners. One evening, Pieper came and announced the formation of the Marxist Society of London. Marxist Society, I asked. What's that? We meet every week to discuss another of your writings. We read aloud, examine sentence by sentence. That is why we call ourselves Marxists. We believe completely and wholeheartedly in everything you have written. Completely and wholehearted. Yes, and we would be honored, Herr Dr. Marx. He always called me Herr Dr. Marx. If you would come and address the next meeting of the Marxist Society. Oh, I cannot do that. Well, why not? Because I am not a Marxist! I didn't mind his bad English. Mine was not that perfect. It was his way of thinking. He was an embarrassment, a satellite encircling my words and reflecting them to the world, but distorting them. And then he defended those distortions like a fanatic, denouncing anyone who interpreted them differently. I once said to Jenny, do you know what my greatest fear is? And she said that the workers' revolution will never come? No, that the revolution will come, and it will be taken over by men like Pieper. Flatterers when out of power, bullies and braggarts when holding power, dogmatists. They will speak for the proletariat and interpret my ideas for the world. They will organize a new priesthood, a new hierarchy with excommunications and indexes, inquisitions and firing squads. All this will be done in the name of communism, delaying for 100 years the communism of freedom, dividing the world between capitalist empires and communist empires. They will muck up our beautiful dream, and it will take another revolution, perhaps 2 or 3, to clean it all up. That is what I fear. No, I was not going to have Pieper translate Das Kapital into English. It represented 15 years of work in the conditions of Soho. Every morning, walking past beggars sleeping amidst the sewage, as I made my way to the British Museum in its magnificent library. They are working until dusk, reading. Is there anything more dull than reading political economy? Yes, writing political economy. Then, home through the darkening streets, listening to the street vendors calling out the prices of their wares, the veterans of the Crimean War, some blind, some with no legs, begging for a penny in the noxious air. Poor smell of London. Yes. My critics, trying to minimize what went into Das Kapital, would say, as they always say about radical writers, oh, he must have had some dreadful personal experience. Well, yes, if you want to make much of it, that walk through Soho fueled the anger that went into Das Kapital. Oh, I hear you saying, well, of course, that's how it was then, over a century ago. Oh, only then. On my way here, I walked through the streets of your city, surrounded by garbage, breathing foul air, past the bodies of men and women sleeping in the street, huddled against the cold. Instead of a lassie singing a ballad, a voice in my ear, please, sir, some change for a cup of coffee. You call this progress? Because you have motor cars and telephones and flying machines and thousands of potions to make you smell better? And people sleeping in the street? An official report. The United States gross national product, yes, gross, last year was $7,000 billion. Very impressive. But tell me, where is it? Who is profiting from it? Who is not? Less than 500 individuals control $2,000 billion in business assets. Are these people more noble, more hardworking, more valuable to society than the mother in the tenement nurturing 3 children through the winter and no money to pay the heating bills? Did I not say 150 years ago that capitalism would bring about an enormous increase of wealth in society, but that this wealth would be concentrated in fewer and fewer hands? Giant merger. Chemical Bank and Chase Manhattan Bank. 12,000 workers to lose jobs. Stocks rise. And they say my ideas are dead. Do you know Oliver Goldsmith's poem, The Deserted Village? Ill fares the land to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Yes, decay. That's what I saw as I made my way here this morning. Houses decaying, schools decaying, human beings decaying. But then I walked a little farther, and suddenly I was surrounded by men of obvious wealth, women in jewels and furs. Suddenly, I heard the sound of silence. Was violence being done nearby? Was a crime being committed? Was someone trying to take part of the gross national product illegally from someone who had stolen it legally? The wonders of the market system. Human beings reduced to commodities, their lives controlled by the super commodity, money. The committee doesn't like that. That little flat on Dean Street, Jenny would make hot soup and boiled potatoes. We would have fresh bread from our friend the baker down the street. And we would sit around the table and we would eat and talk about the events of the day. The Irish struggle for freedom, the latest war, stupidity of the country's leaders, a political opposition confining itself to pips and squeaks, the cowardly press. Well, I suppose things are different these days, eh? After dinner, clear the table and I would work with my cigars handy and a glass of beer. Yes, work until 3 or 4 in the morning. Books piled up on one side and parliamentary reports on the other. And Jenny, the other end of the table, transcribed. My handwriting was impossible, and she would rewrite every word of mine. Can you imagine a more heroic act? Occasionally, a crisis. Well, not a world crisis, but a book would be missing. One day, I could not find my Ricardo. Where is my Ricardo, I asked. Oh, you mean the Principles of Political Economy? She thought that I had finished with it and had taken it to the pawn shop. I lost my temper. My Ricardo! You pawned my Ricardo? Be quiet, she said. Last week, didn't we pawn the ring my mother gave me? Yes, that's how it was. We pawned everything, especially gifts from Jenny's family. And when we ran out of those gifts, we pawned our clothes. One winter, you know London's winters? I did without an overcoat. Another time, I walked out of the house and my feet began to freeze in the snow. I realized I was not wearing shoes. We had pawned them the day before. When Das Kapital was published, we celebrated, but Engels had to lend us money so we could go to the pawn shop and retrieve our linens and dishes for the dinner. Engels, a saint. There is no other word for him. When they cut off our water, our gas, when the house was dark, our spirits low, Engels paid the bills. His father owned factories in Manchester. Yes, capitalism saved us. He did not always understand our needs. We had no money for groceries, and Engels would send us crates of wine. One Christmas, we did not have the means for a Weihnachtsbaum and a Christmas tree. And Engels showed up with 6 bottles of champagne. So we imagined a tree, formed a circle around it, and drank champagne and sang Christmas songs. I knew what my revolutionary friends were saying. Marx the atheist with a Christmas tree. Yes, I did say religion is the opium of the people. But no one ever pays attention to the full passage. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of heartless conditions, the soul of a soulless world. It is the opium of the people. True. Opium is no solution, but sometimes it is necessary for the pain. And don't I know pain from my boils? And doesn't the world have a terrible case of boils? I keep thinking about Jenny. How she packed up all our possessions and brought our daughters, Jenishin and Laura, across the channel to London. Gave birth 3 times in that cold, miserable flat on Dean Street. She nursed those babies, tried to keep them warm, saw them die one by one. Guido had not yet begun to walk. Francesca was a year old, and I had to borrow £3 for her coffin. As for Moosh, he lived 8 years, but something was wrong from the start. He had a large, handsome head, but the rest of him never grew. The night he died, we all slept on the floor around his body until the morning came. When Eleanor was born, we were fearful, but she was a tough little thing. And it was good that she had 2 older sisters. They had barely survived themselves. Jenishin was born in Paris. Paris is marvelous for lovers, but not for children. Something about the air. Laura, our second, was born in Brussels. No one should be born in Brussels. In London, we had no money, but we always had our Sunday picnics. We would walk an hour and a half into the countryside. Jenny and I and the children and Lenchen. Yes, I'll tell you about her. Lenchen would make a roast veal, and we would have tea and fruit bread and cheese and beer. Eleanor was the youngest, and she would drink beer. No money, but children need a vacation. One time I took our rent money and sent them to the Atlantic coast of France. Another time I used our groceries money to buy a piano because the girls loved music. Father is not supposed to have favorites among his children, but Eleanor. I would say to Jenny, that Eleanor is a strange child. And she would say, you expect the children of Karl Marx to be normal? Eleanor was the youngest, the brightest. Imagine a revolutionary at the age of 8. That's how old she was in 1863. Poland was in rebellion against Russian rule, and Tussie wrote the letter. That's what we called her, Tussie. She wrote a letter to Engels about those brave little fellows in Poland, as she called them. At the age of 9, she sent a letter to America, advice to President Lincoln on how to win the war against the Confederacy. And she smoked, and she drank wine. And still she was a child. She would be dressing her dolls while taking a sip from a glass of wine. At the age of 10, she played chess with me, and I could not easily defeat her. At the age of 15, she suddenly became furious against the law about observing the Lord's Day. No activity on Sunday was permitted. So she organized Sunday evenings for the people at St. Martin's Hall and brought musicians there to play Handel and Mozart and Beethoven. The hall was packed. Over 2,000 people. It was illegal, but no one was arrested. A lesson. If you are going to break the law, Do it with 2,000 people. And Mozart. I used to read Shakespeare and Aeschylus and Dante aloud to her and her sisters, which she loved. Her room was a Shakespeare museum. She memorized Romeo and Juliet and made me read over and over again those lines when Romeo sees Juliet for the first time. The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. Hussey was not easy to live with. Oh no. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a child that finds flaws in your reasoning? She would argue with me about my writings. Take my essay on the Jewish question. Not easy to understand, I admit. Well, Eleanor read it and immediately challenged me. Why, she asked, do you single out the Jews as representatives of capitalism? They are not the only ones poisoned by greed and commerce. I tried to explain, I am not singling out the Jews, merely using them as a vivid example. Her answer was to start wearing a Jewish star. I'm a Jew, she announced. What could I say? I shrugged my shoulders. And Eleanor said, that's a very Jewish gesture. She could be so annoying. Hussey knew that my father had converted to Christianity. It was not practical to be a Jew in Germany. Is it ever practical to be a Jew anywhere? He had me baptized at the age of 8. This fact intrigued Eleanor. One day she asked Moore, the family called me that because of my complexion. I know that you were baptized, but you were circumcised first, weren't you? Nothing embarrassed that girl. At such times, she was impossible. Listen to this. Alongside her Jewish star, she wore a crucifix. No, she was not enamored of Christianity, but of the Irish and a rebellion against England. She learned about the Irish struggle from Lizzie Burns, Engels' love. Lizzie was a mill girl and could not read. Engels spoke 9 languages. You would think that would make it hard for them to communicate, but they loved each other. Lizzie was very active in the Irish movement, and Eleanor would visit, and they would sit on the floor and drink wine and sing Irish songs together until they fell asleep. It was that terrible night, the night they hanged 2 young Irishmen right there in Soho, while a drunken crowd cheered on. Yes, those genteel English with their afternoon tea and public hangings. Oh, yeah. I understand you don't hang people anymore. Only gas them or inject poison into their veins or use electricity to burn them to death. Much more civilized. Yes. They hanged 2 young Irishmen for wanting freedom from England. Eleanor wept and wept. I tried to tell her, Hussey, you don't have to get involved in the horrors of the world so soon. You are just 15. And she said, that's the point, Moore. I am not 13. I am not 14. I am 15. Yes, 15. And she became infatuated with every dashing, handsome man who visited our flat. I could draw up a list. Throughout her entire life, Eleanor was clever in politics, idiotic in love. She was mad about that hero of the Paris Commune, Lissagaray. But at least he was a Frenchman. Jenishin's fellow was English. English men are like English food. Need I say more? and Laura's lover, Lafargue. His public displays of ardor were absurd. He would put his hand on her ass in public as if it were the most natural thing. And Jenny defended him. It's his Creole background, she said. You know his family came to France from Cuba. As if everyone in Cuba walks around with their hand on somebody's ass. Jenny was always trying to calm me down. She might calm me, but she was unsuccessful with my boils. Did you ever have boils? There is no sickness more odious. They plagued me all my life and led to stupid attempts to analyze me via my boils. Marx is angry at the capitalist system because he has boils. Imbeciles. How do they account for all the revolutionaries that don't have boils? But they always find something. This one was beaten by his father. This one was nursed by his mother until he was 10. That one had no toilet training. As if one must be abnormal to resent exploitation. Every explanation except the obvious, that capitalism, by its nature, its assault on the human spirit, breeds rebellion. Oh, I know. They say that capitalism is much more humane than it was in my time. Oh, really? Just a few years ago, yes, it was in the newspapers. Factory owners locked the doors on women working in their chicken factory in North Carolina. Why? To make more profit. There was a fire. 25 workers were trapped, burned to death. Yes, perhaps my anger did inflame my boils. But you try working. You try sitting and writing with boils on your ass. And don't tell me about doctors. That they knew even less than I did. Much less because the boils were mine. I could not sleep. Until one day, I discovered something miraculous. Water. It's as simple as that. Cloths soaked in warm water. Jenny would apply them patiently, hour after hour. She would get up in the middle of the night when I cried out and apply those soothing wet cloths. Sometimes when Jenny was away, Lenchen would do that. Lenchen. Here we are, living in poverty in Soho, and Jenny's mother decides to send us Lenchen to help with the babies. We had pawned our furniture, but suddenly we had a servant girl. That's how it is when you marry into the aristocracy. Your in-laws don't send you money, which you desperately need. They send you fine linens and silverware and a servant. Maybe not a bad idea. The servant can take the linens and silverware to the pawn shop to get money. Lenchen did that many times. She was never a servant. The girls adored her. Jenny had tremendous affection for her. Jenny was ill. Lenchen was at her side, tending her every need. But yes, her presence did create a great tension between Jenny and me. I remember a scene. One day, Jenny said, "This morning I saw you looking at Lenchen." Looking, what do you mean? I mean the way a man looks at a woman. I still don't know what you mean. It was one of those conversations that cannot possibly come to any good. There was all this going on inside our flat, and outside was London. Can you imagine the streets of London in 1858. The coster girls trying to sell a few rolls for a few pennies. The organ grinder with his monkey. Prostitutes, magicians, fire eaters, street sellers, bellowing trumpets, ringing bells, organs, hurdy-gurdies, brass bands, Scottish pipes, and always a beggar girl singing an Irish ballad. Yes, that is what I saw and heard as I made my way home each evening from the British Museum, beneath the gas lamps that had just been lit. Till I got to Dean Street and made my way through the mud and sewage, thinking about the care they took in paving the wealthier neighborhoods. Oh well, I suppose it's only fitting that the author of Das Kapital should slog through shit while writing his condemnation of the capitalist system. Jenny was not sympathetic about my complaints about wading through the mud on the street. No. That is how it feels to me reading Das Kapital, she would say. The book worried her. Yes, Das Kapital. She worried that I would bore people from the start with my discussions of commodities and use values and exchange values. She thought the book too long, too detailed. She used the word ponderous. Imagine! She reminded me what our trade union friend Peter Fox said when I gave him the book. I feel like a man who has just been given an elephant as a gift. Yes, Jenny said, it is an elephant. I tried to tell her, this is not the Communist Manifesto, which was meant for the general public. This is an analysis. Then let it be an analysis, she said, but let it cry out like the manifesto. A specter is haunting Europe. The specter of communism. Yes, she said, that excites the reader. A specter is haunting Europe. Then she read the first lines of Das Kapital, to torment me, of course. The wealth of a society in which the capitalist mode of production prevails presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities. One day, Jenny said to me, do you know why the censors have allowed this to be published? Because they cannot understand it and assume no one else will. I reminded her Das Kapital was receiving favorable reviews. She reminded me most of those reviews were written by Engels. I said that maybe she was being critical of my work because she was unhappy with me. You men, she said, you cannot believe that your work deserves criticism, and so you attribute it to something personal. Yes, more, my personal feelings are there, but this is separate. Yes, her personal feelings. Jenny was having a terrible time then. I suppose I was responsible, but I did not know how to ease her anguish. You must understand that. We fell in love when I was 17 and she was 19. She was marvelous looking. Auburn hair, dark eyes. For some reason, her family took a liking to me. They were aristocrats. Aristocrats are always impressed by intellectuals. Her father and I would have long discussions on Greek philosophy. I had done my doctoral thesis on Democritus and Heraclitus. I had come to realize that up till now, philosophers had only interpreted the world, but the point was to change it. When I was expelled from Germany, Jenny followed me to Paris. There we married. She gave birth to Jenishin and Laura. We were happy in Paris, living on nothing, meeting our friends in the cafe. They also lived on nothing. What a bunch we were. There was Bakunin, the huge, shaggy anarchist. Engels, the handsome atheist, Heine, the saintly poet. Oh, Stirner, total misfit. And Proudhon, who said, property is theft, but wanted some. Being poor in Paris is one thing. Being poor in London is another. We moved there with 2 children, and Jenny was soon pregnant again. I sometimes felt she blamed me for having to bring up our children in a cold, damp flat where someone was always sick. Jenny came down with smallpox. She recovered, but left pockmarks on her face. I tried to tell her she was still beautiful, but it didn't help. I wish you could know Jane. What she did for me cannot be calculated. And she understood the fact that I could not simply get a job like other men. Oh, yes, I did try once. I sent a letter of inquiry to the railway for a position as clerk. Their response was as follows. Dr. Marx, we are honored by your request for a position here. We have never had a doctor of philosophy employed with us as a clerk. But the position requires legible handwriting, so we must regretfully decline your offer. Huh? Jenny believed in my ideas, but she was impatient with what she thought were the pretensions of high-level scholarship. Come back down to earth, Herr Doctor, she would say. She wanted me to explain my theory of surplus value in a way that ordinary workers can understand. I tried to tell her no one can understand it without first understanding the labor theory of value and how labor power is a special commodity whose value is determined by the cost of the means of subsistence and yet gives value to all other commodities, which always exceeds the value of labor power. She would shake her head. No, that won't do. All you have to say is this. Your employer pays you the barest amount in wages, just enough for you to survive and work. But out of your labor, he makes far more than what he pays you. So he gets richer and richer while you stay poor. All right! Let's say that only 100 people in world history have ever understood my theory of surplus value. But it's still true. Last week, I was reading reports from the United States Department of Labor. There you have it. Your workers are producing more and more goods and getting less and less in wages. And what is the result? Just as I predicted. The wealthiest 1% of the American population owns 40% of the nation's wealth. And this in the great model of world capitalism. The nation that has not only robbed its own people, but has sucked in the wealth from the rest of the world. Jenny was always trying to simplify ideas that were by their nature complex. She accused me of being a scholar first and a revolutionary second. Forget your intellectual readers, she said. Address the workers. She called me arrogant and intolerant. Why, she asked, do you attack your fellow revolutionaries more vehemently than you attack the bourgeoisie? Proudhon, for example. The man did not understand that we must applaud capitalism for its development of giant industries and then take them over. Proudhon thought that we must retreat into a more simple society. When he wrote his book, The Philosophy of Poverty, I replied with a book of my own, the poverty of philosophy. I thought that was clever. Jenny thought it was insulting. I suppose Jenny was a far better human being than I could ever be. She encouraged me to get off my behind and involved in the cause of the London's workers. She came with me when I was invited to address the first meeting of the International Working Men's Association. It was the fall of 1864. 2,000 people crammed into St. Martin's Hall. The workers of all countries must unite against foreign policies which are criminal, which play upon national prejudices, and which squander in wars the people's blood and treasure. We must unite across national boundaries to vindicate the simple laws of morals and justice in international affairs. Workers of the world, unite! Jenny liked that. She kept the family together. The water shut off, the gas shut off, but she never tired of the subject of female emancipation. She felt that women's vitality was being sapped by staying home and darning socks and cooking, so she refused to stay home. She accused me of being theoretically an emancipationist, but practically ignorant of the problems of women. You and Engels, she said, write about sexual equality, but you do not practice it. Well, I'm not going to comment on that. Jenny supported with all her heart the Irish in their struggle against English rule. Queen Victoria had said, those Irish are really abominable people, not like any other civilized nation. Jenny wrote a letter to the London newspapers. England hangs Irish rebels who want nothing but freedom. Is England a civilized nation? Jenny and I were powerfully in love. How can I make you understand that? We went through hellish times in London. Love was still there, but at a certain point, things changed. I don't know why. Jenny said it was because she was no longer the great beauty I had wooed. That made me angry. She said it was because of lynching. That made me more angry. She said I was angry because it was true. And that made me furious. They claim that because the Soviet Union collapsed, that communism is dead. Do these idiots understand what communism is? Do they think that a system run by a thug who murders his fellow revolutionaries is communism? Scheißkopf. Journalists and politicians who say such things, what kind of education did they have? Did they ever read the manifesto that Engels and I wrote when he was 28 years old and I was 30? In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. You hear that? An association. Do they understand the objective of communism? Freedom of the individual to develop himself, herself, as a compassionate human being. Do they think that someone who calls themselves a communist or a socialist and acts like a gangster understands what communism is? To shoot those that disagree with you? Can that be the communism that I gave my life for? That monster that took all power for himself in Russia and who insisted on interpreting my ideas like a religious fanatic while he was lining up his old comrades against the stone wall before firing squads. Did he permit his citizens to read the letter that I sent to the New York Tribune, in which I said that capital punishment cannot be justified in any society calling itself civilized? Socialism is not supposed to reproduce the stupidities of capitalism. Here in America, your prisons are full. Who is in them? The poor. Some committed violent, terrible crimes. Most are thieves, robbers, burglars, sellers of drugs. They believe in free enterprise. They do what the capitalist does, but on a smaller scale. Did you ever read what Engels and I wrote about prisons? Rather than punish individuals for their crimes, we should destroy the social conditions which engender crime and give to each individual the scope which he needs to develop his life. Yes, we spoke of a dictatorship of the proletariat, not a dictatorship of a party, a central committee, not a dictatorship of one man. No, we spoke of a temporary dictatorship of the working class. The masses of the people will take over the state and govern in the interests of all until the state itself becomes unnecessary and gradually disappears. Bakunin, of course, disagreed. He said that any state, even a worker state, if it has an army or police or prisons, will become a tyranny. He loved to argue with me. Do you know about him? Bakunin, the anarchist? If a novelist were to invent such a character, you would say the existence of such a person is not possible. To say that Bakunin and I did not get along is a great understatement. Listen to what he said when Engels and I were in Brussels writing our manifesto. Marx and Engels, especially Marx, are ingrained bourgeois. We were ingrained bourgeois. Of course, compared to Bakunin, everyone is bourgeois because Bakunin chose to live like a pig. And if you did not live like a pig, if you had a roof over your head, a piano in your sitting room, if you enjoyed some fresh bread and some wine, you were bourgeois. Now, I grant the man courage. He was imprisoned, sent to Siberia, escaped, wandered the world trying to foment revolution everywhere. He wanted an anarchist society, but the only anarchism he ever succeeded in establishing was inside his head. He once tried to start an uprising in Bologna and almost killed himself with his own revolver. His revolutions failed everywhere, but he was like a man whose failures with women only spur him on to more. Did you ever see a photograph of Bakunin? Oh, giant of a man, bald head that he covered with a little gray cap, massive beard, ferocious expression. He had no teeth, scurvy, result of his prison diet. He seemed to live not in this world, but in the world of his own imagination. And he was oblivious to money. When he had it, he gave it away. When he did not have it, he borrowed without any thought of returning. He had no home. Or perhaps I should say the world was his home. He would arrive at a comrade's house and announce, "I'm here. Where do I sleep and what is there to eat?" In an hour, he was more at home than his hosts. There was that time in Soho. We were having dinner and Bakunin burst in, didn't bother to knock. We were having dinner. It was his habit to arrive at dinner time. He knocked the door off its hinges almost and came in and looked around and smiled that toothless smile and said, "Good evening, comrades." And without waiting for a response, he sat right down at the table and began devouring meat and sausage in huge chunks, shoving in cheese and glass after glass of brandy. I tried to tell him, "Mikhail, please try the wine. We have plenty of that. Brandy is expensive." So he took a sip of the wine, spit it right out. "Absolutely tasteless," he said. "Brandy helps you think more clearly." Bakunin's head was filled with anarchist garbage, romantic utopian nonsense. I wanted to expel him from the International, but Jenny thought that was ridiculous. Why, she asked, do revolutionary groups with only 6 members always threaten someone with expulsion? He had 100 disguises because police were looking for him in every country in Europe. When he came to us in London, he was dressed as a priest. At least he thought he was. He looked ridiculous. He was with us a week. And one night we stayed up drinking and arguing and drinking some more until neither of us could walk. In fact, I fell asleep in the midst of one of Bakunin's perorations. And he shook me until I woke up. "I have not yet finished my point." It was that glorious time in the winter of 1871. The Commune had taken power in Paris. Yes, the Paris Commune. Bakunin leapt with his full bulk into that revolution. The French understood him. They had a saying, "On the first day of the revolution, Bakunin is a treasure. On the second day, he should be shot." Do you know about that magnificent episode in human history, the Paris Commune? The story starts with stupidity. I am speaking of Napoleon III, yes, nephew of Bonaparte. He was a buffoon, a stage actor, smiling to the crowd while 16 million French peasants lived in blind, dark hovels, their children dying of starvation. But because he kept the legislature, because people voted, it was thought they had democracy. A common mistake. Bonaparte wanted glory, so he made the mistake of attacking Bismarck's armies. He was quickly defeated, whereupon the victorious German troops marched into Paris and were greeted by something more devastating than guns. Silence. The statues in Paris had been draped in black. An immense, invisible, silent resistance. They did the wise thing. They paraded through the Arc de Triomphe and quickly departed. And the old French order, the Republic, liberals, they called themselves. They did not dare enter Paris. No, they were trembling with fear because the workers, the housewives, the clerks, the intellectuals, the armed citizens had taken over the city. The people of Paris formed not the government, but something more glorious, a commune, the collective energy of the people. It was the Commune de Paris. I once said to Bakunin, "Do you want to know what I mean when I speak of the dictatorship of the proletariat? Look at the Commune of Paris. That is true democracy." No, not the democracy of England or America, where your elections are circuses, with people voting for one or another guardian of the old order, where no matter what candidate wins, the rich go on ruling the country. The Commune of Paris lived only a few months, but it was the first legislature in history to represent the poor. Its laws were for them. It abolished their debts, postponed their rents, forced the pawnshops to return their most needed possessions. They refused to take salaries higher than the workers. They lowered the hours of the bakers and planned for how to give free admission to the theater for everyone. The great Courbet himself, whose painting stunned Europe, presided over the Federation of Artists. They reopened the museums and formed a commission for the education of women. Something unheard of, education for women. They took advantage of the latest in science, the lighter-than-air balloon, and launched one out of Paris to soar over the countryside, dropping printed papers to the peasants with a simple, powerful message. Our interests are the same. The Commune declared the purpose of the schools: to teach children to love and respect their fellow creatures. I have read your endless discussions of education. Such nonsense. They teach everything needed to succeed in the capitalist world, but do they teach the young to struggle for justice? The communards understood the importance of that. And they educated not only by their words, but by their acts. They destroyed the guillotine, that instrument of tyranny, yes, even revolutionary tyranny. And then, wearing red scarves and carrying a huge red banner, the buildings of Paris festooned with sheets of red silk, they gathered around the Vendôme column, symbol of military power, a huge statue surmounted by the bronze head of Napoleon Bonaparte. A pulley was attached to the head, a capstan turned, and the head crashed to the ground. People climbed on the ruins. A red flag floated atop the pedestal. It was now the pedestal not of one country, but of the human race. Men and women watching wept with joy. Yes, that was the Commune of Paris. The streets were always full, discussions going on everywhere. People shared things. They seemed to smile more. Kindness ruled. The streets were safe without police of any kind. Yes, that was socialism. Of course, that example, the example of the Commune, could not be allowed. So the armies of the Republic marched into Paris and commenced a slaughter. The leaders of the Commune were taken to Père Lachaise Cemetery, put in front of the stone wall, and shot. Altogether, 30,000 were killed. Yes, the Commune of Paris was crushed by wolves and swine. But it was the most glorious achievement of our time. They could not allow the commune to live. It was dangerous, too inspiring an example for the rest of the world, and so they drowned it in blood. It still happens, does it not, that whenever in some corner of the world the old order is pushed aside and people begin experimenting with a new way of living, people innocent of ideology, just angry about their lives, it cannot be permitted. So they go to work. You know who I mean by they. Sometimes insidiously, covertly, sometimes directly, violently, to destroy it. Oh yes, they keep saying capitalism has triumphed. Triumphed! Why? Because the stock market has risen to the sky and the shareholders are wealthier than ever before? Triumphed? When 1/4 of American children live in poverty? When 40,000 of them die every year before their first birthday? In New York City, 1,000 people lined up before dawn for 200 jobs. What will happen to the 800 who are turned away? Is that why you are building more prisons? Yes, capitalism has triumphed, but over whom? You have technological marvels. You have sent men into the stratosphere, but what about the people left on earth? Why are they so fearful? Why do they turn to drugs and alcohol? Why do they go berserk and kill? Yes, it's in the newspapers. Your politicians are bloated with pride. The world will now move toward the free enterprise system. Has everyone become stupid? Don't they know the history of the free enterprise system? When government did nothing for the people but everything for the rich? When your government gave 100 million acres free land to the railroads and looked the other way as Chinese immigrants and Irish immigrants worked 12 hours a day on those railroads and died in the heat and the cold. And when those workers rebelled and went on strike, the government sent in armies to smash them into submission. Why the hell did I write Das Kapital if not because I knew the misery of capitalism, of the free enterprise system? In England, little children were sent to work in the textile mills because their tiny fingers could work the spindles. In America, young girls went to work in the mills of Massachusetts at the age of 10 and died at the age of 25. The cities were cesspools of vice and poverty. That is capitalism then and now. Oh yes, I see the luxuries advertised in your magazines and on your screens. Yes, all those screens with all those pictures. You see so much but know so little. Doesn't anyone read history anymore? What kind of shit do they teach in schools these days? Are so sensitive. Miss Jenny. She would have something to say about all this. I watched her die, sick and miserable at the end. Surely she remembered our years of pleasure, our moments of ecstasy in Paris, even in Soho. I miss my daughters. anniversary of the Gulf War. A victory short and sweet. Yes, I know all about these short, sweet wars that leave thousands of corpses lying in the field, children dying from lack of food and medicine. In Europe, Africa, Palestine, people killing one another over boundaries. Did you not hear what I said over 150 years ago? Wipe out these ridiculous national boundaries. No more passports, no more visas, no more border guards or immigration quotas. No more flags or pledges of allegiance to an artificial entity called a nation. Workers of the world, unite! Backside is killing me. I confess, I did not reckon on capitalism's ingeniousness in surviving. I did not imagine that there would be drugs to keep the sick system alive, wars to keep industries going, to make people crazed with patriotism so they forget their misery, religious fanatics promising the masses that Jesus will return. I know Jesus. He's not coming back. I was wrong in 1848, thinking capitalism was on its way out. My timing was a bit off, perhaps by 200 years. But it will be transformed. All the present systems will be transformed. People are not fools. I remember your President Lincoln saying, you can't fool all the people all the time. Their common sense, their instinct for decency and justice will bring them together. Don't scoff. It happened before, it can happen again on a much larger scale. And when it does, the rulers of society will be helpless to prevent it. Servants will refuse to serve. Soldiers will disobey orders. Yes, capitalism has brought about wonders unsurpassed in history, miracles of science and technology. But it is preparing its own death. Its voracious appetite for profit, more, has created a world of turmoil. It has turned everything, art, literature, music, beauty itself, into commodities to be bought and sold. It's turned human beings into commodities. And not just the factory worker, but the physician, the scientist, the lawyer, the artist, the poet, all must sell themselves in order to survive. And what will happen when all these people realize that they are all workers, that they have a common enemy? They will combine with others in order to fulfill themselves. And not just in their own country. No, because capitalism needs a world market. Its cry is free trade, because it must be free to roam everywhere in the globe in search of profit. More. But in doing so, it has created a world culture. People cross boundaries as never before. Ideas cross boundaries. Something new is bound to come of this. When I was in Paris with Jenny in 1843, I was 25, and I wrote that in the new industrial system, people are estranged from their work because it is distasteful to them. They are estranged from nature as machines, smoke, smells, noises invade their senses. Progress, it is called. They are estranged from others as everyone is set against everyone else, struggling for survival. And they are estranged from their own selves, living lives that are not their own, living as they do not really want to live, so that a good life is possible only in dreams, in fantasy. But it does not have to be. There is still a possibility of choice. Only a possibility, I grant. That is now clear. Nothing is certain. I know that now. I was too damn certain. Now I know. Anything can happen. But people must get off their asses. Does that sound too radical for you? Remember that to be radical is simply to grasp the root of the problem, and the problem is us. I have a suggestion. Pretend you have boils. Pretend that sitting on your ass causes enormous pain. So you must stand up, must move, must act. Let us not speak of capitalism, socialism. Let us instead speak of using the incredible wealth of the world for human beings. Give them what they need. Food, medicine, clean air, pure water, trees and grass, pleasant homes to live in, some hours of work, more hours of leisure. Don't ask who deserves it. Every human being deserves it. Time to go. You resent my coming back and irritating you? Look at it this way. It is the second coming. Christ couldn't make it, so Marx came. Heiskopf.